Okay, now we'll start with part 3, and that's the actual launch and getting into trajectory on the way to the moon, being on the moon, and then coming back to Earth. So let me get back to sharing our screen here. Okay, we left off with our crew, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin and Mike Collins, and they're prepared to launch on a mission to the moon. And here they are inside their little vehicle that transports them from the suiting area to the launch pad itself. And you can see they're all dressed up. They've got their space suits on, their helmets in hand, and ready to get on board the Apollo vehicle. And here it is, waiting for them. It's the view that you get early in the morning, just prior to launch. Here's another view. You can see the launch escape tower we've been talking about. You can see off into the distance. You remember, you're up about 300 feet. Here you can see the vehicle ready for launch. You can see the condensation on the outside of the vehicle with ice particles from the coolness of the liquid oxygen. And here's what we're going to do. So briefly, stage 1 burns for about 2.5 minutes, 7.7 million pounds of thrust. Its weight changes by 15 tons every second. In other words, there's 15 tons of fuel every second being pumped through these engines. It gets us to an altitude of 36 miles high and a velocity of 6,000 miles an hour. The amount of thrust, if you can visualize this, the 7 million pounds of thrust, that's about like 200 fully loaded tour buses. So if you can think about that with the weight that's lifting off of these with these rocket engines. That first stage burns about 5 million pounds of fuel, all totaled. Then it moves on to the second stage after 2.5 minutes, and its thrust is much less. It's about a little over 1 million pounds of thrust. Its weight changes by 1 ton per second, gets us up to 108 miles high at 17,400 miles an hour. Now, by the way, this first stage, if you can visualize about 90 of these big fuel tankers that you see on the highway, gasoline trucks, it's about 90 of those that it's burning up in that 2-minute period of time. In the second stage, it burns about 1 million pounds of fuel. That's about 90 of those things, or about 60, I'm sorry. And then we're close to orbital velocity, but not quite. Then it goes to third stage, and that'll burn for 6 minutes. After we're in orbit, we do a little kick with the third stage here, and then we get into Earth orbit. And partially through that Earth orbit, the systems are all checked out, and if everything checks out, then we can fire that rocket again. This time that third stage fires for 6 minutes with about 230,000 pounds of thrust and gets us to 24,900 miles an hour, about 25,000 miles an hour. And that's the velocity it needs to get to escape from the Earth's gravitational pull. Now here's a launch film from NASA, and it's kind of self-explanatory. There's the view that the crew would get as they approach that vehicle early in the morning. Here they come out of their launch craft that they use to travel from the suiting center up to the pad itself. You see the crew, the little boxes that they're carrying as a life support system, since their suits are now totally closed and enclosed and pressurized and cooled. So they go 300 feet up the stack, and there's a crew waiting for them to get on board the vehicle. And here's what it looks like.
This is the launch of Apollo 11, July 16, 1969. It's camera E8, which shows the base of a Saturn V vehicle done on 16mm film at 500 frames per second. Now, this particular camera was started at 5 seconds prior to liftoff. Now, at this speed, what you're going to see in this full 8 minutes and 22 seconds is about 30 seconds worth of actual time. Here, ignition sequence start is already started, and the kerosene and liquid oxygen is mixing. The F1 engines were started by bursting a hypergolic cartridge, which spun up the turbines to start driving the propellants into the engine. Now you're seeing that liquid oxygen and kerosene mixing and billowing up in the initial stage of starting up those engines. Now, when it reached full thrust and started to get thrust from those 5 engines, 7.5 million pounds, you see how it sucks all the material back down underneath the vehicle. And that was because now all of that material is going at a tremendous speed and being pushed out into the flame trench, and it just sucks all of that material back down. On the right, you see 2 tail service masts. There's a third one on the other side of the vehicle. And around the vehicle, you also see 4 hold-down arms. Now, the vehicle sat on those hold-down arms. There was a mechanism inside there that held it onto the launch pad until liftoff. At T-0, those would release after they got the proper signal from the engines that all 5 engines were running properly. It would release, and as soon as it released, those tail service arms would move, and all the mechanisms would go up into a hood underneath those hoods so that they would be protected from the exhaust of the engines. You see ice coming down now off the vehicle. You know that the space shuttle is real concerned about debris coming off the external tank, which is insulated. And the reason for that is the thermal protection system on the space shuttle, which sits on the side, is very delicate. You can't be hit by that much. But the Saturn V had no such problem. So the Saturn V's liquid oxygen tank on the first stage wasn't insulated. So you get a lot of ice coming off of it when it hits the vibration. Now you see liftoff has happened. The tail service masts are pulling back up into the hoods. The F1 engines are coming up, and you see that dark band of gas that's coming out of those engines all around. And then you'll see it get to the really bright part. Now that cool gas, it's cooler gas is the reason it's dark. That's coming from the turbine exhaust. And the turbine exhaust is dumped into the engine around the inside of that nozzle, so it would be cooler and would act as something of an insulator on that nozzle extension so it wouldn't get too hot. That central gas is what's coming out of the engine injector, where the liquid oxygen and the kerosene is being mixed together, coming out of that injector. Now on the tail service mast and on the hold down arms, in fact, even over here on the left-hand side in the corner of the tower, you see a white material, whitish material that it's painted. That is actually a material that was designed to burn and char. In trying to protect this material so that the launch installation, so that it would get a minimum of damage from the Saturn V launch, they painted these particular tail service masts and hold down arm covers and the corners of this tower with this ablative kind of paint. And this material was designed to burn and char so that it would burn and the underlying material would be insulated and stay safe. You'll see that happening in just a moment. Now you're seeing that the water deluge system has definitely been activated, and you're seeing a lot of that flash into steam and come up against the quartz mirror that the camera is housed in. Now, remember I was talking about that white material. It's aflame now as it's getting hit by the engine exhaust. And it was designed to do that. You'll see it's already starting to char. You see the third tail service mast over on the other side. There were 3 total. And you see at least 3 of the 4 hold down arms. You see the hoods now and the hold down arms have closed over, so they're protecting that mechanism that held the vehicle down. And you see that all.
Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to stop that there and proceed on to the next slides. As you can see, it's a very violent thing this launch is, with all this fuel burning up. It's just nothing but a controlled explosion. So it's a pretty violent thing to watch. So once we're in orbit, this is what it looks like, and we're going to partially through one orbit, a partial orbit, we're going to check out the system to see that everything is okay. And if it is, then we're going to fire that third stage again for that 6-minute period and put us on a path at 25,000 miles an hour towards the moon. And while we're doing that, Mike Collins, the command module pilot, is going to separate this command module with the crew in it from that third stage. Going to bring the vehicle out, turn it around, and face inward, and rendezvous and connect to the lunar module, and then pull it out, and then it and the command module will go on to the moon, while the rest of the shroud and the rest of the rocket engines are going to on their separate way into an orbit. Here's what it would look like to Mike Collins. This is the lunar module, and this is the docking cone that you see here. And here's they do a fly around to check the system out, and you can see everything to make sure that everything is looking all right. There are no visually incorrect observations. Here's what it would look like if you were inside the lunar module looking towards the command module. Here you can see the antennas that are pointed back to the Earth, so the communications can be had between the Earth and the command module at all times. Notice that the command module itself is covered in that gold foil to protect from the radiation of the sun. These are the attitude control rockets to control the attitude of the vehicle as it travels through space. So now you're in a condition where you're docked to the lunar lander down here, and you're going to travel that way for a couple of days. You started out at 25,000 miles an hour, and the Earth keeps pulling you back, and you get to a point in the space where, as the Earth gets smaller and smaller as you're traveling these couple of days, the Earth gets to be like a little marble out there. And by the same token, when you look the other direction, you see the moon, and the moon gets bigger and bigger as you approach the surface of the moon. And then you fire a retro rocket, backwards firing rocket, on the backside of the moon, and go into orbit around the moon. And then you wait then until everything is checked out, and check out all the systems. Then you separate. Mike Collins is in this vehicle all by himself, while Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin are in the lunar module, to be able to land on the surface. And so this is what they would see looking at Mike Collins. And here's another shot. You can see the surface of the moon in the background. Here's what Mike Collins would see looking out at the lunar module. And I want to call out these little sensors that you see sticking below the landing legs, landing feet, are sensors such that when one of those sensors touches the surface of the moon, this rocket engine, the descent stage engine, will automatically shut off, and the vehicle will settle down on the surface of the moon. Here you can see the Earth in the background. Mike Collins took this photograph, and you can see the surface of the moon plainly down there. And what will happen, Mike Collins will see this vehicle slowly disappear further and further away from him. This is what it looks like on the backside of the moon. Doesn't look like a very good landing spot, does it? And here you can see in Mike Collins, the vehicle appears to be smaller and smaller as it drifts away from him, Mike Collins in the command module, as that vehicle drifts towards the landing on the moon. Here is just prior to lunar landing, and you can see the lunar surface is much, much smoother, and that's the type of environment that you want to make that first lunar landing.
Where go, same tide, where go. Altitude, velocity light, 8.5 down, 20 feet. 15 forward. 11 forward, come down nicely, 200 feet. 4.5 down, 5.5 down. 60 seconds. Lights on. 6. Down 2.5. Forward. Forward. That's 40 feet down 2.5. Picking up some dust. 4 forward. 4 forward. Drifting to the right a little. That's 8. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. We copy you down, Eagle. Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
So the Eagle landed safely, and Neil Armstrong had about 30 seconds of fuel left. That's all he had left. And he had maneuvered around some of these craters like you see here, so the one of the legs wouldn't land into one of those craters and have to abort the mission. So this is what it looked like to them, looking out the window of the lunar lander. Pretty flat, desert looking area. Here's the reflection from the sun, the shadow of the lunar lander as it landed on the lunar surface. And now they're going to get out of the vehicle and explore the moon once they get their systems all checked out.
At the foot of the ladder, the limb footbeds are only depressed in the surface about 1 or 2 inches, although the surface appears to be very, very fine grained as you get close to it. It's almost like a powder. Ground mass is very fine. Step off the limb now. That's 1 small step for man, 1 giant leap for mankind.
Okay, so there you have the first steps of the moon. It'll be great when we go back in 2024. We're going to go back to the moon, and we're going to have high definition television. So it'll be a real treat to see what happens from the lunar landing there. Here you can see the pad, and as Neil Armstrong described it, only sank an inch or so, or a couple of inches into the surface of the moon. So there was no deep dust to worry about. And there's Neil Armstrong took this photograph of his boot print in the surface of the moon. And here is Buzz Aldrin coming out of the lunar lander. He'll come down the ladder over here and step onto the surface of the moon. There he is coming down the ladder. Last step before he sets foot on the surface of the moon. And here he is. Most of these pictures were taken by Neil Armstrong. This just shows Buzz Aldrin in one of the equipment bays getting out experimental apparatus that they'll leave on the surface of the moon. And of course, here's a famous picture of the flag planted on the surface of the moon. And here, I like this photograph because it shows the reflection of the lunar lander and of Neil Armstrong taking a picture of Buzz Aldrin on the surface of the moon. Here's the plaque that was left there stating that we came in for all mankind and came in peace. Here is Buzz Aldrin putting down a seismometer, I believe it is, to check for lunar quakes. When meteorites hit the surface of the moon, it surface rings like a bell, and of course it picks up moonquakes just like things do here on Earth, like our seismometers do on Earth. Here is a conic tube, it's called, It's used to this day. You can shine a laser light from the Earth into this surface, and no matter what angle that light enters, it reflects back directly backward to on the same angle, and that's used to calculate the distance that the moon is from the Earth. And we know now that the moon is going away from the Earth about the length of your thumbnail every year. So in millions and millions of years, it's going to be quite a distance from the Earth. Here's Neil Armstrong after the lunar walk. Everything is done. They're ready to come back and check their systems out. And here's how they got back up into orbit.
Proceeded, 3, 2, 1. Ignition. Right away, Houston. Vector grid. Ag stop. Over. I hear you have good fun. Okay, 30 seconds. 308 your number. Take us through 1,500 feet, and 8 dot looks good.
Okay, so that was a pretty important part of the mission, obviously. You heard them call out the pitch over numbers. Those are very important because you're launching vertically, and then you pitch over to get more parallel to the surface of the moon and get into a circular orbit so that you can meet Mike Collins up and rendezvous on the lunar orbit again. Here again, this is what it would look like if you were Neil Armstrong rendezvousing on the lunar surface, or above the lunar surface with Mike Collins. And again, another view of the spacecraft that Mike Collins has been in all this time. And of course, they on the back side of the moon, they separate the lunar module from the command module, and the command module's engine fires and directs us on its trajectory back to the surface of the Earth again. Same path we came on, except a few days later. The total length of the mission, by the way, was about 8 days. And of course, you're going to see the moon get smaller and smaller and smaller. And the Earth, on the other hand, is going to get bigger and bigger. So it took you 25,000 miles an hour to get away from the Earth. Because of the conservation of energy, you're going to come back into the Earth at 25,000 miles an hour also. So that's the velocity that you're traveling at when you enter into the atmosphere of the Earth. The spacecraft is separated from this command module, and the spacecraft's heat shield is facing the Earth, and begins to glow and slow down the vehicle's energy from 25,000 miles an hour down to a speed where the parachute can open and land safely in the ocean. I'm not going to show this very long, just to show you the outside glow in the spacecraft as they come into re-entry. So you can see the friction of the air becoming such that the ionization of the gas becomes hot enough to form a plasma, and then gets hot enough to form white gas, just like the surface of the sun. It gets so hot. So that's what it'll look like outside the window during re-entry, as you're being pushed back into your seat with about 6 Gs, 6 times the weight of your body. Here's what it looked like over Hawaii the early morning that the launch vehicle, or that the re-entry occurred. And here they are in the ocean. So the crew all dressed up in protective suits because we were afraid at the time, that the medical people were afraid of the possibility of bringing back some viruses. You can see 3 balloon type objects that are inflated to keep the vehicle upwards in case it landed upside down. You can see the beating the vehicle takes as it comes through re-entry. So that nice bright silver or gold material is now ablated away with the heat. They're brought aboard the Hornet, aircraft carrier Hornet, put into isolation on board a little Airstream vehicle. Here you can see President Nixon greeting them on board, and they'll transport that little vehicle back to the States and keep the crew in quarantine. I think it was 10, 15 days in quarantine. Here you can see the crew loading the vehicle on board the Hornet. And here you can see the celebration at the launch center. Chris Kraft, the director of the missions, and some of the NASA officials in the background, flags waving, of course. And then across the world, there were many ticker tape parades in which the three astronauts could be shown to the people and people could celebrate with them. I always show this one because every time I look at it, I think of cleanup. How would you like to clean up all the confetti and all of the things from this ticker tape parade in New York? And here's another, the last slide here. Here's showing some of the modern vehicles. Of course, today, we probably wouldn't have that. We'd have the astronauts inside a closed vehicle for protection. So that's how we did it. That's how we went to the moon and back and safely returned. And in 2024, you'll be able to see it happen again in a very similar manner. So as you watch that happen, you think about what we've been through here today, and you'll see a very similar thing. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk with you, and hopefully we'll talk again sometime after we go back in 2024. Now I'll end this session here, and I'll stop the sharing and turn off our Zoom. So long, everyone.